That's Marshall Crenshaw 40 years ago. Marshall is with us now to help celebrate the 40th anniversary of his second album, Field Day, which has just been reissued.
The thing with the 40th anniversary records that have come out, that's a nice saga from my point of view, because I was able to claim the U.S. copyrights to the sound recordings that I did back in the day for Warner Brothers.
Right.
And that was a happy moment for me. And in fact, I was shocked when it was explained to me that I could do it. But anyway, so that gave me the ability to curate the stuff the way I wanted it, present it the way I wanted it to be presented.
Right.
And, so that was a great thing, a great turning point, a great crossroads in my life to be able to do all that. And the process was cathartic, It was anyway, it's been great, and the shows have been going really great. I have a really great band,
right?
And I'm still alive and well. All that,
all that. Well, you mentioned that you were able to present yourself the way you want to. My understanding is when Field Day came out originally, when it looked like this, that the album cover was not ideal in your mind, but you kind of rushed it out because you were kind of told you should. So.
Oh, you know the story? Yeah,
I know a little bit of the story, but maybe you can elaborate.
Yeah, that's correct. We did the album. It is a crazy show business story. A bumpy one. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we did the album, and it was our second album, and we did it rather soon after the first for stupid business reasons that I don't want to go into.
Sure.
But I decided to really seize the opportunity because, I love to make records. Yep. Somebody suggested we make a second album, and I'm like, great, yeah. Now I can, kind of go down a different road. And so I did that. And then when we finished, my brother and my wife and I went on a vacation. My brother's girlfriend at the time had a job as an assistant director on the film Amadeus.
Oh yeah,
with Milos Forman. So yep. He was gonna go visit her in Czechoslovakia. And as soon as he told me about that, I said, "Oh, we're gonna go too. My wife and I are gonna go."
Right.
So we all went. We all went over there, and it was just like a dream almost, And then I come back from that trip, and I'm presented with that album cover that you just held up before.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm not so crazy about this. And, it was everything from that time period was kind of nuts,
Right.
I always had a sort of a haphazard approach to business. But anyway, it got foisted on me. But then now that I've got the chance to correct all of those things, I certainly went right ahead and did that,
Right. So when you were making Field Day, like you say, you're just coming off your debut album, which got, if I remember correctly, pretty good reviews. It was getting good coverage, good comments and stuff. And then you did make a little change in your sound. You hired Steve Lillywhite to produce it, who was known for things like the Psychedelic Furs and not exactly probably the genre that a lot of folks thought you belonged into. So tell me about that decision.
Well, I don't want to go, into any great length here, but because my stories sometimes can get long. But
okay.
Anyway, I made a lot of recordings before I made my first album.
Right.
And my actual first record that was a real a vinyl record and was released by a record label. It was a single released by a New York label. It was called Something's Gonna Happen.
Right.
On Shake Records. That was my first record. And then before that, I recorded a bunch of stuff at home. And many of those recordings are kind of out in the world right now.
Right.
And then I did my first album, and, in 99% of people's minds, that's my first record. But it really wasn't.
Yep.
Something's Gonna Happen was a hit in New York.
Yep.
And it got played on the radio in New York alongside of Robert Gordon's version of Someday, Someway, which was a hit in New York.
Yep.
And so we really kind of blew up New York, right? and there was a lot of excitement about us and all that. And where was I? Oh yeah, so then we made the album, and it was a a kind of a funny saga, just transitioning from doing everything, um, not having to really answer to anybody except myself.
Yep.
All of a sudden, I'm on a record label, and they're telling me what to do, right?
Right.
On the first album, and
So what kind of
some of
things
the
did they
time
tell you to do? What does that mean exactly?
one thing they told me to do, and I'm actually really glad that they did. They insisted that I record my song someday, some way.
Right.
And I thought, well, why should I do it? Everybody knows Robert Gordon's version. It was just out.
Yep.
But that was clueless on my part, because only people in New York City really knew Robert Gordon's version.
Someday, somewhere, someday, somewhere, someday, somewhere, baby, I'll understand you.
That was one example, but anyway, it just was like, I had to please them, which was just like a new way of life for me.
Gotcha.
And so then, when it comes time to do Field Day, I said, well, this time I'm just going to do what I want to do, and I'm not going to, if anybody doesn't like it, that's too bad for them. So my A&R person in New York was this really savvy, brilliant person who I still revere. Her name was Karen Berg. She was really a special human being.
Uh-huh.
And she'd heard of Steve Lillywhite. I explained to her why I wanted to work with him. I said, on my first album, there's like a lot of layered guitars, and like everything's doubled and tripled and blah blah blah, and it doesn't sound like me. I can't hear my guitar on this record. And I said, what I want to do is bring in Steve, because he can get a huge sound with just a spare number of elements.
Yep.
That's why I asked him to do the record. And
yeah.
And I told him, and I told him and the engineer, I said, guys, it's one guitar. I'm not layering guitars. And it's one vocal. I'm not doubling my vocals. And they were like, yeah, sure, we know what to do. So that was it. I finished Field Day, and I loved it. I really loved it. And then it seemed to kind of blow up in my face.
Right.
Really, that's what happened. But everybody's going, well, what happened? He changed his sound. And I'm like, no, I'm correcting my sound.
Gotcha. And
I'm making my sound.
Yeah. And 40 years later, I was listening to the two records, because I remember I was doing radio back in 40 years ago in Rochester, and there is not a major difference in the sound. There is some difference, obviously, but it's not like earth-shatteringly. But I think it was a perception maybe of Steve Lillywhite and what he had done before. Is, because he'd worked with Susie and the Banshees and XTC and bands like that. And it was like, why is this guy who's like a roots rocker working with this guy?
I know. Yeah, it threw people a curveball, but that's just their problem, But like, what was I gonna say? Yeah, that's how it went.
Yep.
It was received that way. But you know what else I think it was? And again, I'll try not to get too lengthy here, but I think it was backtracking, because when our first album was coming out, this great friend of ours in New York City who really loved the band was doing publicity for us under the table, because she worked for another record company.
Yep.
And she came to me one day and said, I can get you like a big 4-page spread in Rolling Stone to roll out your first album. And I knew that I was taking a big risk, just understanding how the press worked and stuff like that. But I didn't want to say no to her, because she was really sweet. So I said, okay, sure. So we did this. So there was this big hype about us in Rolling Stone. And, for every hype, there's a potential backlash, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And I think a lot of the reaction to Field Day was just people. It was spillover somehow from the what the hype accomplished.
Gotcha. Yeah, here in New Zealand, we have a thing called the tall poppy syndrome.
What's that? What is that?
It's like if you aim to grow higher than everyone else, they will cut you down. Too much. It's like the opposite of the American thing, where you know, as soon as you're born, you're told you can be president, you can do anything. Here, it's the tall poppy syndrome. It's like we're going to mow you down if you stick up above the rest.
How about that? Yeah.
So
well,
that's
anyway,
interesting.
Field Day was received in a funny way back then, but it's
Yeah,
still
yep.
people still buy it though. That's the cool thing.
Yeah, well, why not? Now you mentioned the press and you got help, and I see you're doing a benefit for a gentleman who just passed away a couple of months ago. His name was Scott Scheidner, who was a music journalist. So it's nice to see a music journalist getting some recognition. So if you want to talk about him specifically, that'd be great, because I think it's happening like tomorrow that you're doing this benefit. But in general, also, how did the press help or hinder you?
Well, boy, that's a big question. I think I'll talk.
Sorry about that.
I'm going to talk about Scott instead.
Good, that's cool.
Because, you know, I mean, rock critics are people too, you know. And I know if, like somebody like Scott, really, his whole life was rock music, you know. It was just like, I never had a conversation with him about anything to do with his personal life or where he came from. But we were friends, like real friends. But what we had in common was music, which is certainly a central thing to both of us, you know. Yeah. So it was a real friendship. But anyway, he passed away, and I just was sad, you know. He and I were friends, and he was loved by a lot of people. But he's just somebody who kind of gave his life to this particular thing, and now the world is different, you know, and there's just not that much left of that world that he lived in. Honestly, it's like he's not the only person I know who kind of got on the wrong end of the passage of time in that way, you know. Yeah. But Scott was a great guy, and we're gonna do this salute to him tomorrow night in New York City. And it's going to be emotional, you know, for the people that are there. Yeah. It's a pretty cool lineup of folks that you got. Some friends of yours also going to be there, and I imagine it's got to be fun too, as well as emotional. Yeah, I always love those multi-artist things. Yeah. You know, like I just did one about a month ago. It was the 50th anniversary of the Nuggets album. Oh, I wanted to go to that. I was like dying to go to that, but here I am over here, so I couldn't. Tell me about it. Yeah. Well, you know, the Nuggets album was a compilation album that came out 50 years ago now, and it was compiled by Lenny Kaye. Yep. And you know, Lenny and I are friends and have been for a very long time, and but you know, the album it sort of codified the genre that they now refer to as garage rock. Yep. And then after that, it was called punk rock, but then that turned into something else, and now all that stuff that's on the Nuggets album, now they call it garage rock. But you know, like when the album came out, I knew about half the songs, and you probably did too, because many of them were national hits. You know, it wasn't all obscure stuff. But anyway, to get back to the event, I just really love those multi-artist things like that. You know, they're like kind of family reunions, and we're all getting older. We kind of treasure whatever, you know, savoring the time we have left and all that kind of stuff, you know. So so the Nuggets thing was one of those deals, and then I think the Scott Schindler thing will be like that also, you know. Well, so what did you perform at the Nuggets thing? I did 2 songs, and I did one called "I'm 5 Years Ahead of My Time," which is kind of like a pro LSD song, you know. Right. You know, it's one of my favorites on the Nuggets album. It's by a group called the Third Bardo. I did that. I don't even know what that means. I should have looked it up. But I did that one, and I did one called "It's a Happening" by the Magic Mushrooms. That one's a good one. Yep. That's a real crazy one. But anyway, I love that music. I love that music. You know. Yep, absolutely, very cool.
So speaking of music, I think your most recent album of original stuff was like in 2009, wasn't it? So
Yeah.
do you still write? Is it just not being made, or what's your mindset as far as making new music these days?
I haven't written much lately at all. Although I co-wrote a song right at the beginning of lockdown,
Right.
and it's out there. It's out there on the digital platforms. I guess it's on Spotify and all that. It's a track called "Will of the Wind."
The merry-go-round is broken down. The merry-go-round is broken down. And there's a sandpaper wind blowing through the trees. The circus clowns follow me around. Painted ponies lying on the ground. From far away the siren sound. Hear the siren sound.
That's my last thing that I did, and it's got that kind of lockdown outlook about it. It's a song basically about the world catching on fire and coming to an end, but it's a good rock and roll song, and I wrote that. But before then, I hadn't written or co-written anything since 2016. So in other words, I'm hardly doing it at all anymore. But I'm still busy. I'm busy with all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. So with these reissues, are you planning on reissuing every one of your albums of the 80s, say, as the anniversary dates approach?
I do have the rights to do it if I want to. And, the label.
Do you much have extra stuff in the can?
I've got some stuff. I have an archive. I've tried to keep most everything that I thought was worth keeping. And,
right.
I mean, the label that did the first two albums, Field Day and the first one, that's a label called Yep Rock Records.
Right.
Which is a really good record label for an old guy like me here in the United States. And they did a beautiful job with everything.
And they have good distribution down here too, so that's good.
Oh, they do, huh? Well, that's great.
Yep.
They've expressed interest in doing the rest of the Warner Brothers catalog, but we only made a deal for the first two albums. I'm open to it. I want to talk to them about it.
Yep.
So we shall see. But the first two are, for me, they're kind of in their own space. Like they represent a really magical time in my life, the way I view it. And then the three Warner Brothers albums that I did after that, I did those after I had asked to be dropped by the label. I asked very.
That's going to go well, isn't it?
I asked very nicely, and I thought I made a good case. But they, I was talking about it to the two head bosses of the label. It was just me and them in a room, and I just said, I'm just at my wit's end here, and I don't have anything left in me right now, and I said, would you mind if I just walked away and forgot that any of this ever happened? That's really how I felt after Field Day. I never got over my anger about it. But anyway, they said, no, you can't go. So I stayed and made 3 more albums. And so those are in a different they're in a different category for me, Yeah.
You got to be happy that you made those albums ultimately.
I am, yeah.
Because they're pretty good.
Thank you. Yeah, some people swear that they're really fantastic. Yeah. But anyhow, so there might be more. I'm open to the idea.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to go back and listen to those later albums now.
Okay, but again, remember what I said. When I did the first two, I was young and I was high on life. I was not jaded from being in show business. Not yet. But I mean, anyway.
Right. Very good.
I shouldn't say.
And now with this, that's quite all right. It sounds like you've had an interesting run, a journey, which is still going on, which is always nice to see. So what would you say to a young whippersnapper coming up into the business these days? What one piece of advice would you give them?
I'd say that there's no path There's no roadmap. There's no nothing. You just have to go out there and find your own way, however you can manage to do it. My own saga was just like unlike anybody else's, and that's how everybody's is. And so
Yep.
that's what I would say. I would say if you really just have your mind utterly made up and you're determined to get out there in the world and reach other people and be seen and all that stuff like that and express yourself and be an artist, then find a way to do it if you can.